My daughter-in-law announced across my dinner table, without so much as looking up from her phone, that 25 members of her family would be arriving at my home for Thanksgiving week. All of them. For 6 days. I set my glass of water down without making a sound. I looked at my son, who was suddenly very interested in the pattern on his placemats. Then I looked at her. I told her that sounded just fine. I said I hoped they would enjoy it. What I didn't tell her, what she had no possible way of knowing, was that, by the time that first rental car pulled into my driveway, I would be sitting 400 miles away watching the Atlantic Ocean, and the house she had so confidently promised her family would no longer be mine to give. I want to say something before I go any further. I am not a dramatic man. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a forensic accountant for a federal agency in Richmond, Virginia. My entire career was built on patience, on watching, on letting numbers tell me the truth that people tried to bury. Liars always leave footprints in the ledger. They cannot help it. And I have never once in my professional life stormed into a room and made a scene when a quieter, more precise intervention was available to me. My wife Vivian understood that about me better than anyone alive. She used to say I was the only man she knew who could be absolutely furious without changing the expression on his face by so much as a millimeter. She wasn't wrong. We spent 34 years together in that house, a 4-bedroom colonial on a half-acre in the western suburbs of Richmond, the one we bought the year our son Elliot started kindergarten. Vivian is gone now. 5 years. Pancreatic cancer, 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end. The speed of it is still something I cannot fully think about without my chest doing something I cannot name. The house became very quiet after she passed. I kept her garden going because she asked me to, her succulents on the kitchen windowsill, her reading chair by the bay window where she used to sit on Sunday mornings with her tea and a novel, her upright piano in the living room that she played every evening after dinner, hymns mostly, a few old standards. I didn't touch that piano. I cannot play it, but I could not move it either. It was just there like a record of the life we built, like proof that something real had happened in those rooms. My son Elliot is 37 years old. He works in corporate technology sales, which is a fine profession if you are willing to work at it. Elliot is willing to work at it, just enough to keep his job and not a single step further. He married Kristen 4 years ago. Kristen is 33. She describes herself, and I am quoting her directly, as a content creator and lifestyle curator. What this means in practical terms is that she photographs expensive brunches, posts them on social media, and receives very small monthly checks from a sponsorship platform in exchange for recommending skincare products she barely uses. It does not come close to covering their expenses. It never has. 2 years ago, they knocked on my door on a Saturday morning. Elliot explained that their landlord in Arlington had raised the rent to something they could no longer justify, and that they needed a temporary place to land while they saved for a down payment on something of their own. 4 months, he said. 5 at the absolute outside. I cleared out the guest suite on the second floor, changed the bedding, made space in the closets. I told them they were welcome, and I meant it, because whatever my son had become, he was still my son, and Vivian would have opened that door before I even reached for the handle. They never left. The first year I told myself it was fine. People need time. The housing market is brutal. Down payments require sacrifice. All of that is true as far as it goes. But the truth I was choosing not to examine too closely was right in front of me every single morning. Kristen slept until 10. She would come downstairs, help herself to whatever I had made, and sit at the kitchen island filming her coffee cup for 60-second videos while I cleaned up around her. Elliot left for work early, which I respected, but he came home and disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone with a woman who treated my kitchen like a content set, and my home like a hotel with complimentary housekeeping. She left rings on the wood surfaces. She left cabinet doors hanging open. She ran the dishwasher with 4 items in it. I said nothing. I wiped up after her. I refilled the soap dispenser. I told myself I was choosing peace. The moment I stopped choosing peace was a Tuesday evening in late September. I had stayed up past midnight, finishing some paperwork at my desk, when I heard Elliot and Kristen arguing in the guest suite. I was not eavesdropping. The walls of that house are plaster, and plaster carries sound like you would not believe. I heard Kristen tell Elliot that her credit card had been declined at a restaurant downtown. Her voice was tight and high, the way people sound when they are furious and trying to stay quiet. Elliot said something I could not make out. Then she said very clearly, "Just use the emergency account. He never checks it." I went still at my desk. I have a joint savings account that I opened for Elliot when he graduated college. I had seeded it with $15,000, money I had set aside over years specifically for that purpose, and I told him it was a foundation, not a fund, for genuine emergencies only, a real crisis. I had transferred money from it twice in his 20s when he genuinely needed it, and both times I told him to replace what he could when he got stable. I had not thought about that account in well over a year. I went to my computer that night and pulled it up. The balance was $412. $15,000, gone in careful, incremental withdrawals spread across 18 months. Nothing that would have triggered a fraud alert. Nothing that would have looked wrong to anyone who was not paying close attention. Whoever did the withdrawing understood that much. I closed the browser window. I turned off the desk lamp. I sat in the dark for a long time and thought about the kind of person who does that to their father. Then I thought about the kind of father who lets it happen. I had some uncomfortable thinking to do about both of us. I did not say a word. Not the next morning, not the week after. I added it to what I had already been keeping in the back of my mind, quietly, the way a forensic accountant keeps a running file. You do not confront prematurely. You wait until you have everything. The dinner where it all came out of hiding happened on a Wednesday in early October. I had made a pot roast, the kind that takes all afternoon, the way Vivian used to make it with root vegetables and a bay leaf and a cup of red wine in the braising liquid. I set the table. They came downstairs, she with her phone, he with the exhausted look he had been wearing for months. We were halfway through the meal when Kristen set her phone face down on the table. That is how I knew something was coming. She only puts the phone down when she needs both hands for a performance. She told me she had been coordinating something exciting for Thanksgiving this year. She said her family, her parents, her 2 sisters with their husbands and children, her aunt and uncle, several cousins, had decided they wanted a real traditional holiday, the kind with a big house and a proper table and home-cooked everything, and she had offered to host them here. She said it as though she were delivering good news, as though I should feel pleased to be of service. I asked how many people we were talking about. She did that thing where she tilts her head and makes a pained face, as if the number were an unfortunate administrative detail rather than the actual point. 25, she said, give or take. Flying in the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, staying through the weekend. Before I could say a single word, she reached into the pocket of her cardigan and slid a folded piece of paper across the table toward me. Not toward me, at me. The way you slide paperwork at someone you have already decided has no standing to object. I opened it. It was a grocery list. I have reviewed federal audit documents with fewer line items. Prime beef tenderloin from a specific butcher on Grove Avenue. A half-dozen specific wines, one of which I recognized as retailing around $90 a bottle. Imported cheeses. Specialty charcuterie components that required their own paragraph of instruction. Specific items for 2 family members with dietary restrictions that she spelled out in precise detail, as though I were being briefed for a catering contract. I did a rough mental calculation. The food alone was approaching $4,000. The alcohol would come close to doubling it. She told me she would handle the decorating and the coordinations, since that was more her area, and she needed me to handle the shopping, because I had more time and a larger vehicle. She said this with the bright, uncomplicated confidence of someone who has never once in their adult life been told no by someone who actually meant it. Elliot was looking at his plate. I looked at him for a moment. I gave him time. Silence creates pressure, and pressure sometimes produces honesty in people who have buried theirs. My son felt the silence. He shifted in his chair. He picked up his fork. He set it back down. He looked up at me with an expression that was equal parts guilt and resignation. He said it would mean a lot to her family and to us. I looked at my son. I thought about Vivian. I thought about $15,000 drained across 18 months. I thought about a career spent watching people believe they had successfully hidden what they had done, right up until they realized they hadn't. I folded the grocery list neatly along its crease and placed it in my shirt pocket. I said, "That sounds like a wonderful plan." Kristen exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for a week. She picked her phone back up. Then she added, without looking at me, that there was one more logistical matter to settle: the sleeping arrangements. Her parents needed the master suite. Her mother had a bad hip. Private bathroom, en suite, she said, not a shared hallway situation in the middle of the night. It was only practical. I could take the pull-out sofa in the study for the week. She had looked into it, and it opened up quite comfortably, actually. The master suite. The room where Vivienne's perfume bottles were still on the dresser. Where I still slept on my side of the bed, out of 34 years of unexamined habit. The room where Vivienne had spent her last lucid Sunday afternoon, telling me which plants in the garden she was most worried about, and asking me, please, to keep the rosemary going, because it was the easiest one, and she did not want to think about me struggling with it. I looked at Elliot. He was looking at the table. I waited. Long enough that Kristen glanced up from her phone to see what was taking so long. Long enough that any decent man would have felt the weight of what was being asked of his father and found something in himself to push back against it. My son felt that weight. I could see it in the way his shoulders drew together. His eyes came up and met mine for just a second. Then he said quietly, not quite looking at me, "It's only for a few days, Dad. It would make everything a lot easier." There are moments in a man's life that function as clean dividing lines, before and after. That night at my own dinner table was one of them. My son chose his wife's holiday convenience over the room where his mother had spent the last year of her life. He said it softly, almost gently, which somehow made it worse. I smiled. I told them both it made complete sense. I said I would begin clearing out my personal items from the bedroom that week, so everything would be ready and comfortable for her parents. I said the shopping was no problem. I carried my plate to the sink, washed it, dried it, hung the dish towel, and said goodnight. I went to my study and closed the door behind me. I sat at my desk for a long time without turning on a light. Then I picked up my phone and called Jasper. Jasper has been my estate attorney for over 20 years. He is 71, semi-retired, still takes my calls on the first ring. He is not a warm man. He is the kind of attorney who has sat across from people attempting to conceal assets and dismantled them systematically without ever raising his voice. I have always respected him precisely because he operates the way I do, quietly, thoroughly, and without sentiment when sentiment is not warranted. He said, "I've been wondering when you would call." I told him, "Start drafting all of it." The next morning I logged into my banking portal and went through every joint account, every shared access point, every automatic transfer authorization. It took me less than an hour to close off everything. I removed Elliot as an authorized user on the joint checking account. I revoked transfer access on the savings. I changed the login credentials on my investment portal. Then I went to my credit card account and found the supplementary card I had issued Kristen 8 months ago for what she had called household essentials. I scrolled through the transaction history the way I used to scroll through contractor invoices, searching for irregularities. What I found was exactly what I expected to find: nail appointments, 2 separate spa visits at a place on the near West End that charged over $200 for a facial, online boutique charges, 3 of them in a single week, a hotel booking in Charlottesville on a long weekend when she had told Elliot she was visiting a girlfriend, beauty box subscriptions, restaurant charges for parties of 4 on evenings when I had been alone in the house. I did not cancel the card that day. An immediate cancellation would have given her time to adjust her plans. Instead, I set a hard spending cap of $35 per transaction and scheduled a full account cancellation for the Thursday before Thanksgiving, 48 hours before her family was due to arrive. She would go to the grocery store that week, fill her carts with everything on that list, and discover at the register that my card was no longer hers to spend. The house itself required more deliberate work. I will not pretend that part was simple. That house was not just an address. It was the place we planted the dogwood trees the spring Elliot was born. It was the kitchen where Vivienne taught herself to make her grandmother's cornbread recipe, the one she never wrote down because she said a recipe you have to look up is one you don't really know. It was the living room with the piano that nobody played anymore. But a house is a structure. Vivienne was not in the drywall or the hardwood or the crown molding. She was in the photograph on my desk. She was in the way I still made coffee the same way she taught me. She was in the garden out back that I had kept alive because she asked me to. You can carry your people with you. You cannot keep paying for a structure that has become someone else's entitlement. I had received 3 letters over the past 2 years from a residential development company that wanted to purchase my lot, along with 2 adjacent properties on the block, to build a townhome community. I had ignored all 3. I called their acquisitions representative on a Thursday morning, told him I was open to a conversation, and by the following Monday I was sitting across from Jasper reviewing a purchase agreement for a number that was, candidly, more than the property was worth by any standard measure. They wanted the land. That urgency belonged to me. The terms we negotiated were specific. I remained the legal owner through Thanksgiving weekend. Title would transfer the Monday after. The utility accounts, electric, gas, water, would be transferred to the development company's property management division on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, 2 days before the guests were scheduled to arrive. Standard protocol for a property pending demolition. All services hard terminated on transfer to eliminate liability exposure. No exceptions, no reconnections, no appeals process that would lead anywhere useful. The house would go dark and cold at the precise moment the accounts changed hands. I signed the paperwork on a Tuesday afternoon and drove home in the kind of quiet you feel after making a decision that has been a long time coming. The packing took 2 weeks. I worked during the hours when Kristen was out for her appointments and Elliot was at the office. I brought boxes from a storage supply company across the city. I wrapped Vivienne's perfume bottles and her jewelry chest in packing paper and moved them to a climate-controlled storage unit I had rented in my own name, nowhere near anything they had access to. I took down the paintings we had collected over 30 years, a watercolor from a gallery on the Outer Banks, 2 prints we had found at a flea market in Fredericksburg, the family portrait commissioned the year Elliot graduated high school. I replaced each one with a cheap print purchased from a discount home goods store across town. Landscapes, generic ones. Nothing you would look at twice, but nothing that would signal a vacancy to someone who wasn't scrutinizing the walls. I moved Vivienne's china from the cabinet to a padded box in storage and replaced it with the everyday stoneware from the back of the shelf. I worked methodically, 1 room at a time, the same way I worked a case, without rushing, without leaving visible evidence of the process, without calling attention to what was happening until it was too late for the information to be useful to anyone. One afternoon, Kristen came home early and found me taping a box in the living room. She stopped, assessed the situation with that particular expression of hers, and asked what I was doing. I told her I was clearing out clutter before her family arrived, getting rid of old things that had accumulated over the years, making the rooms feel more open for her guests. She clasped her hands together and said that was exactly what the house needed. She said while I was at it, I might as well move some of the older pieces out of the guest rooms to give her relatives more floor space, and that the piano, frankly, was taking up valuable real estate in the living room that the children could use. She said this with genuine enthusiasm, as if she were doing me a favor by directing the effort. I told her I would see what I could do about the piano. I donated it to a woman named Roberta, who taught music at an elementary school in Henrico County and had been looking for an upright for her classroom. I made it a gift outright. It felt correct. Vivienne would have liked knowing it was being learned on by children who were just starting. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I finished the last boxes, drove the final load to the storage unit, and stood in the parking lot with the padlock key in my hand. Everything of value was safe. What remained in the house was furniture, decoys, and the hollow architecture of a life I was finished inhabiting. That evening, Kristen texted me an updated list with additions. Her father required a specific Kentucky bourbon that she spelled out by name. Her sister's youngest had developed a new food sensitivity she was informing me of 72 hours before his arrival. She wanted to know if I had confirmed the pickup window with the butcher. I looked at the text, then I put my phone in my coat pocket, picked up the leather bag I had packed the night before, and walked to the car. My flight to Charleston departed at 4 in the afternoon. I had a rental cottage on Sullivan's Island, booked for 12 days. I did not tell them I was leaving until I was already at the departure gate. I sent Elliot a text. It said, "I won't be home for the holiday. The house is yours to manage. I'll be in touch after the 1st of December. Safe travels to your guests." 3 minutes later, my phone began ringing. I watched it ring from the gate. I boarded the flight. I put the phone in airplane mode somewhere over the Carolinas and did not turn it back on until we landed. I came down in Charleston to 19 missed calls and a voicemail from Elliot so crowded with background noise I could barely make out individual words. Kristen had gone to the specialty grocery store on Carey Street that afternoon, had apparently turned it into content, announcing a Thanksgiving haul for her followers, loading 2 carts with everything on her list, projecting the easy confidence of a woman spending someone else's money in public. She went to the register. The total climbed past $3,800. She handed over the supplementary card with the practiced disinterest of someone who has never once worried about a balance. The card declined. She tried again. It declined again. She paid with her own card, which I later understood pushed her into a credit limit she had been carefully concealing from Elliot for the better part of a year. Her second voicemail was considerably less composed than her first. Thanksgiving morning, the property title transferred at 8 a.m. The utility accounts transferred to the development company's management division at 9. By 10, the electricity was off. By 10:15, the gas went with it. The forecast for Richmond that day was 29 degrees, with a wind advisory through the evening. I was drinking coffee on the cottage porch, watching a pelican work its way down the waterline, when Elliot called for the 16th time. I answered. He was whispering, which told me the house was full. His voice had the particular quality of a man who has lost control of a situation and is only beginning to understand how completely. He said there was a problem with the power. He said he had called the electric company and they had told him the account was registered to a commercial entity. He said they had mentioned something about demolition. He said he needed me to call and clarify. He said he did not understand. I said, I know you don't. I told him I had sold the house 6 weeks ago. I told him the sale was final and legally complete, and there was nothing to call anyone about because everything was proceeding exactly according to the terms I had agreed to. I told him I had a storage unit with everything of his, and Kristen's that they had arrived with, cataloged and accessible. I told him I expected the property to be vacant before I returned in December. I told him any further communication should go through Jasper's office. He said very quietly, Dad, we have 25 people here. I said, I know. You told me it was going to be wonderful. I ended the call and sat with the sound of the water for a while. I learned what happened next from my neighbor back in Richmond, a retired school teacher, 3 doors down, who had watched the whole sequence unfold from her front window, with the frank, unapologetic attention of a woman who has lived long enough to feel no guilt about watching things unfold. She told me about it 2 weeks later when I called to check on the property. Kristen's father, a man I had met twice and found precisely as insufferable both times, the kind of person who critiques the quality of a stranger's coffee while drinking it, had taken organizational control of the situation. He booked a block of rooms at a downtown hotel, not a budget property. He made the phone calls loudly, in the living room, in front of everyone, making sure Kristen heard every word and understood exactly who was being inconvenienced by her miscalculation. Her mother, at the door on the way out, said something to Kristen that my neighbor could not quite hear, but said she could read clearly enough from what happened to Kristen's face in the aftermath. Whatever it was the kind of thing a daughter does not forget and does not easily recover from. The cars pulled away from the curb one by one until the driveway was empty and the street was quiet. Elliot and Kristen stayed alone in the house that night. No heat, no power, no food beyond what was already sitting in a refrigerator warming by the hour. In the morning, a representative from the development company arrived with documents and the calm, businesslike efficiency of someone for whom this is a routine transaction. They were out by early afternoon. I stayed on Sullivan's Island for 10 more days. I ate well. I walked the beach every morning before the tourists were up. I read 3 books I had been meaning to get to for the better part of 2 years. I called Jasper the Monday after Thanksgiving, confirmed everything was in order, and thanked him. He said it was good work. Jasper does not give that assessment lightly, and I received it in the spirit he intended. 6 weeks later, on a quiet Tuesday morning, I signed the purchase agreement on a small clapboard house 6 blocks from the water in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. 2 bedrooms. A screened porch on the east side where the morning light comes in early. A garden out back where I intend, this coming spring, to grow the same rosemary Vivian kept along the fence in Richmond, The plant she told me was the easiest one, the one she trusted me not to lose. The photograph of her is already on my desk. It is the one from our 25th anniversary trip to the Smokies, her hair blowing sideways, laughing at something I had said. I cannot remember what I said. She remembered it for years and retold it at dinner parties, with the specific pleasure of a woman who loved a good story and told it better than anyone. That was how it worked between us. She held the things worth holding. I kept the books. I want to say one last thing plainly, because I know there are people who will hear this and think, why not simply say no? Why the waiting, the planning, the 2 years of silence? I understand that question. I have asked it of myself. The answer is this. I spent 3 decades finding financial fraud in places where the people committing it were absolutely certain they had covered their tracks. The single worst thing you can do when you discover someone has been taking from you is confront them the moment you find out. All that accomplishes is putting them on alert. They adjust, they deny, they reframe the situation until somehow you are the unreasonable party for having noticed. You lose the element of surprise, which is the only real advantage a patient man has over someone who has been practicing their story far longer than you have been gathering your evidence. So you wait, you document, you build the complete picture, and when you act on all of it at once, so cleanly and completely that there is nothing left to negotiate, nothing left to argue, no version of events where they come out looking like the wronged party. That is not weakness. That is not cowardice. That is what it looks like when a man who has spent a lifetime solving problems quietly decides he is finished solving this particular one. My son knows where to find me if he ever decides to become the man I spent 37 years believing he could be. That door is not closed, but I will not stand at it waiting. The pelicans here are worth watching. The morning light off the water at this time of year is the exact kind of quiet I have been trying to find my way back to for a very long time. I think I am almost there.